Our final session of the day then, as we're talking about titled Innovative Solutions to Future Business Challenges. And you've got, I'm sure we're going to get two very interesting perspectives here. In a moment I'm going to hand over to Jane Dudman. Jane, some of you will be familiar with, I'm sure you've probably read a lot of stuff that she's written. She's the editor of the Public Leaders Network at The Guardian, and alongside her, a change to your original programming from the programme. Our second speaker is Carrie Bishop, who's the Director of FutureGov, another organisation that's doing some fantastic work with digital in local government in particular. Format will be similar to what we'll be used to. Jane and Carrie are going to talk for 5 to 10 minutes or so each. Then we'll open up to questions from the audience. Okay, so Jane, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much. It's great to be here at this rather hallowed kind of venues. I'm sure everybody said who's preceded me speaking. I'm Jane Dudman. I edit Guardian Public Leaders, which is our network, our online network at The Guardian, where we write about policy and leadership. And we cover both central government and local government. In fact, we cover all public services. And we have been writing a huge amount, obviously, about digital and innovation. So I'm just going to touch on some of those things very briefly. And I'm very pleased because I think I've got 5 points. I'm not sure about the 2 bits at the beginning, but I've got 5. So I've already kind of learned something from that previous session. So I'm pleased about that we're all going in. We're all kind of speaking to the same hymn sheet. We were asked to think about innovative solutions to future business challenges. What are those future business challenges for councils? Well, we know what they are, don't they? There isn't enough money, you haven't got the right people, and you haven't got the right kit, or you've got some of the right kit but it's in the wrong places, and you've got the right people but they're in the wrong places. So, those are, I don't need to go into any more about that you all know that inside out. So, I was thinking about some of the ways that you might be able to look outside of your organisations for some ideas. And one of the things that we have been writing a lot about across The Guardian, not just in my section of The Guardian, but in some of my colleagues' section, other networks of The Guardian, is about this thing called frugal innovation. Frugal innovation seems to kind of hit a real kind of nerve in terms of looking to developing countries for some ideas for things we can do. Now, a lot of these things are actually not directly IT related, but they are often digital. And one of the things I noticed from the conference so far is that, the emphasis is very much now on digital. It's on the disruption that digital can bring. It's not just about technology and systems. I'll just give a very quick couple of examples. We all know about mobile payments in kind of Africa. We all know about the M-Pesa system in Kenya. There is a fantastic development of a mobile-controlled irrigation pump. Now, you might not need an irrigation pump, you might not need it to be mobile-controlled, but it is really well worth having a look at some of the exciting things that are happening in terms of frugal innovation around the world. So that's one place to actually look, so that's one. 2, my second idea was this. You need to think about, you all have legacy systems and you all have to build on that, and I know that it's an absolute agony often when you're kind of patching together yet another system. But again, there are places around the world where make, do and mend is very much on the agenda because there isn't anything else to do. And aligned with that is very much about the sharing economy, and we're hearing more and more about the sharing economy. And when you bring those two things together, I think you have some very powerful things. The most obvious thing about the sharing economy, of course, is one we're all familiar with now. It's Airbnb, that's the sharing economy idea. Zipcar, simple. Don't buy a car, share it. Use one where you need to pick it up. Of course, these things can only work if they are built on openness. You can't build a sharing economy without open data. You can't do anything very much these days without open data. And I did like the procurement person wandering around the jungle, keeping her kind of details under the arm. We are moving well away from that. And the only way we can do that is by trying to share and collaborate. Where might you look for some ideas about collaboration? You might look to some very unrelated industries. You might look, for example, to gaming. Gaming knows all about collaboration. There are some kind of very interesting instances there. You might look to media and advertising. We're doing quite a lot. You might expect me to say this, of course, I come from the media. But we've had to move, we've had to make significant, we have been disrupted, severely disrupted. I come from a print background. When I joined The Guardian, I was associate editor of a lovely monthly print magazine. Now, everything I do is online. It's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. I can see what works instantly. I watch the stats absolutely, you know, the whole time. And keeping track of metrics, knowing which metrics actually matter and keeping track of them is certainly kind of one way that you can start to kind of build on the things that you already have. Whilst trying to look for the quick and nimble things, ways to get ahead. Of course, these days, that means mobile. Everything is mobile, everything is kind of small and online now. And our rule at The Guardian is you go where the conversation is. That can be difficult for local government, that can be really difficult because you're kind of embedded in places where the conversation might not actually be happening. You have to kind of find the ways to go out. That might be online, it might be on mobile, or it might actually just be a meeting in the village hall. Of course, you're very familiar with that. But bringing those things together is a real challenge, I think. Then where are some other places you might look? You might look to your neighbours. We ran a fantastic competition on what was then local leaders, now public leaders. We ran a fantastic competition at the beginning of the year called Council Challenge, where we had some absolutely wonderful ideas from people inside local government about apps they could develop, things they could do. One great one was about coming together to organise accommodation when people in social workers needed to find out what accommodation was available. That's just one example. Of course, the EC is already kind of doing a lot. There are many digital European projects like FATE, that's for detection for the elderly. That's just one of those projects, which is absolutely right. And the fifth one is, of course, yourselves. I see that Socitm is already, collaborating with the Government Digital Service, piloting in Solihull open platform dashboards. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that kind of innovation as we storm ahead. So just to round off before we kind of come on to the kind of questions at the end, what are the kind of things that you would want to be thinking about as you kind of try and move on from where you are already to build the kind of partnerships for the future? The first thing to say is that none of us actually know what those partnerships are actually going to look like, but we're pretty sure they're going to be much build on what we've already got, and that means private, public and voluntary bodies are going to be delivering public services. I was actually at the launch, the recent report on civil service reform, to see where we've got on civil service reform 2 years on from the original plan, as Edith Brown, at the Cabinet Office just recently. And one thing that really struck me looking at that report was there's lots and lots of talk about collaboration. There wasn't one single mention of local government. There is still, I'm afraid, quite some way to go before we have local public services actually being properly thought of and released, dare I say, from Whitehall. I'm sure we can discuss that more. So what am I thinking? A few points just to finish with. Obviously, you need always to build for responsiveness. The one thing we have learnt in my own line of work is you need to adapt systems for the platform, but that's not the main thing. What actually counts is content. What actually counts is not how you get people the stuff, but what the stuff actually is. Does it do something useful? That's the only criteria in the end. Does it give them some information? Does it enable them to do something? You've got to build on open data and open systems. You've got to get the right people into the right places. You've got to accept that digital is disruptive and then just get on with it. And you've got to, above all, link people up. We've got a system at work actually that it's incredibly simplistic. I mean, it's so simple. It's just an email address where people chuck good ideas they've seen. It sounds so simple, and it's incredibly annoying 90% of the time. It's like all good ideas. You see these things go by and you think, oh, that's nothing to do. Oh, that's a good one. That's it. That's, a really simple idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And Carrie, over to you.
Hi everyone, this is like the kind of like stalwart group, right? Right to the bitter, this is the bitter end session, come on. I'm going to stand here, but I'm also known for arm waving, so excuse any potential noise. I'm going to address the three sort of themes that are in the programme for this session. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about FutureGov. We redesigned public services using elegant technology because, after all, if you work in public services, you deserve world-class technology. Let's face it, you're not in it for the money. You're doing this job because you're passionate about it, and you deserve the very best tools that there are out there to be able to do that job. Some of our examples of some of our work is we have a tool called Patchwork. That's a tool that connects practitioners at the front line of troubled families to each other. So it's that thing about if you're a social worker and you walk into a family for the first time, you have no way of knowing who else from which other public agency is also working with your family. You put their family's contact details in, you'll see who else from which other agency is working with them, then you pick up the phone and you have a phone call with them, because after all, you're a professional and we trust your judgment about information sharing. Another of our tools is called Patchwork. It's a community meal sharing network. So if you're cooking for your family, you chuck in an extra portion, we'll match you with an older person who lives near you. You can take the meal round, have a chat with them, make sure they're okay, let them eat their meal in peace, and then either go back and collect your Tupperware or never do it again. It's entirely up to you. And we also have a thing called Scout, which is a kind of online self-assessment form for adult social care, but also families with children with special needs and disabilities. And as you're filling in your online form, it's more than a form, you'll start to get automated suggestions coming through to you of local organisations that can meet your needs. So it's kind of a bit of that demand management stuff, as we so delightfully call it in local government. And we do all of this through design, technology and change. So we have designers who work with service users to understand what's the problem, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve, not what's the problem for the organisation, but what's the problem for the service user. And they come up with ideas. Then we have a bunch of geeks who sit in the office and code the technology, back end and front end. And then crucially, we have change managers. So these are people who have worked in local government before, they understand what it takes to make change happen in local government. And that's my background as well. I used to work for the London Borough of Barnet. Is anyone from Barnet in the house? No, okay, just me. So that's FutureGov. Okay, so I'm going to talk about openness, then the legacy stuff, and how we can tear down the old world, and then about collaboration and partnerships. So openness, and this section, by the way, contains a little bit of GDS baiting, which I don't think anyone will be too disappointed with in this room. So Tom Loosemore said something earlier about it's not about openness, it's not about open source, it's about behaviour, which I totally agree with. But I think it can go further, right? I think it's about openness to change in general. It's not just about open data, it's not about open source, it's about being open as a human being, and that is all of our responsibility, particularly in this day and age. And the thing about GDS that's always kind of bothered me is this kind of digital by default thing. Which I know is sort of the mantra that we all use and that people buy into very deeply, but the thing for me is it should be digital by design, not digital by default, because digital by default is what gives us things like QR codes, which are horrible and nobody uses. But hey, it's digital, right? We just slap on everything, and therefore we've got something digital. For me, openness by default is really what we should be talking about, with digital by design following on, because if you're talking openness, then the digital is the tool that enables that openness to happen because of its ability to make things transparent. Part of the theme for this session was about how do we really reach out and reach the public. Partly I feel like we do, because sort of we're the public as well, and if we take off our bureaucrat suits and remember to be humans, we can also call on our own personal experience. But aside from that, I mean, for us in the way that we work, it's very much about user insight and user-led design. So it's about actually going and sitting in somebody's living room and listening to them talk about what their experience was of finding that social care, what their experience was of telling their story over and over several times, having empathy for that human experience, and then translating that into something that's actually, as Jane was saying, that's actually useful to the service user, rather than something that solves the organisation's problem. And then, of course, we build in an agile way, so we're constantly testing and iterating. So again, we're reaching out to the public, we're putting tools in front of them, and we're saying, what do you think about this? How can we change it? We're watching how they're using it, we're looking at the data, and then iterating on that. The other slight kind of thing about this is a lot of the talk that I've heard so far today, as I've been here, and certainly the talk that I heard from GDS earlier as well, was fine and all, but it feels very like transaction-y and not very transformation-y. And I'm kind of more interested in the transformational side of things. I think it's important to have transactions online, that's very good, but there's a sort of weird obsession with potholes. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's like, how have we not moved on from potholes? Because there's like 12 pothole reporting apps that are out there. Like, I think we've figured this one out now, guys, and if you haven't sorted it out, then it's pretty easy to do so, and you definitely don't need anyone to talk to you about it. But for me, there's a kind of like, there's tweaks, which if we take an example of like housing benefit, for example, a tweak in housing benefits is, changing one of the questions on the form. And some people call that incremental innovation, by the way, which I think is a pile of crap. Like, we're not in a space anymore where we need incremental innovation. We're in a space where we need radical transformation, and anything less is not going to help us out of the hole that we're in. So we've got changing little questions on a form. That's a tweak in my mind. Then we've got transactions, and that's like putting the form online, which, by the way, is the bare minimum we should be doing in this day and age. We should expect more than that. A transformation is thinking about actually housing benefit as an entire concept. Why do we have people who don't have enough money to live, who don't have enough money to put a roof over their head, and how can we address that problem by starting from the service user and building solutions around them. And so that's the kind of thing that I think is missing from a lot of this debate. Like, it's great to have smooth digital tools that make transactions easier, but we're still doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons a lot of the time. And that sort of leads me to the legacy point, right? What do we do about the legacy systems? In summary, get rid of them. Like, I do accept there needs to be a degree of pragmatism. Some people may call me an idealist, but I know that there's a pragmatism around this. We can't do everything overnight. There isn't enough resource, etc., etc. But the thing I think about is I was involved with a local authority. I won't name them because they have apologised for being silly. But I was involved with a local authority who were procuring an e-marketplace. Who owns an e-marketplace? Pretty much everyone in this room probably was gone and procured one of those at some point. The thing was, the specification of the e-marketplace was basically, we had this hunch that it was wrong. So it was a very long story, but we were put into this kind of competitive tendering process for this e-marketplace. And what we did was we went out and we spoke to some of the care providers who were supposed to be inputting to this e-marketplace. And they all said to us, yeah, no, we're not going to use that. If they procure that thing, we won't use it because as care providers, we don't have the resource on our end to input all of our information into this system, which ultimately is not going to reward us because we have block contracts with the council, and those are actually at a lower rate than the contracts that we want. So we can fill all of our places and meet all of our business needs through self-funder market. So why on earth would we participate in an e-marketplace? So it was all a little bit ill-conceived, and we went into the procurement process and we said, look, we know you've asked for this thing, but actually I don't think you need that. What you need is this thing over here. And we've talked to some people and we've sketched it up. So give us 6 months, a bit of money, and let us build a prototype and test it, and then we'll see. So basically they didn't do that. And we ended up losing out on that particular thing, which is fine. But a year later, that system still hasn't been implemented. And in fact, the money that has been put into, that procurement process, so we never cost the procurement officers time. So we think procurement is free, but it's not. It costs public money to procure the wrong thing a lot of the time. So if we costed that, how much money? Could we take that money out of the procurement process and give it to someone who would be prototyping something, which give you a much quicker sense of whether you're about to procure the right thing or not? In fact, in Australia, where my business partner Dominic is, or has been for the last week, in Australia, they've been doing something where they've had a 2-day hack where they've got a bunch of developers, a bunch of service users all together in a room, and they've hacked up what they think a couple of solutions might look like. They've got 3 or 4 options, and then their next step is to take that out to the market and say, look, in 2 days we hacked this together. As a prototype, doesn't really work. Have you, suppliers, got anything similar that will match this prototype that we've built? Doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be similar because this is what we're aiming for. So rather than they haven't got a spec, they've just got a bunch of prototypes which they're using to inspire the market. I think it's a radically different way of procuring things, and also a cheaper way of procuring some of these huge mega systems. Because as Raquel was talking about, we're in a world of government as a platform now. So this is my other point about legacy systems. Really, is I know legacy systems are quite tempting. It's quite tempting to renew their contracts. It's also tempting to buy more mega systems because you kind of don't want the complexity to manage the complexity. But the thing is, this is the world that we're in now. We're in a world where Facebook is unbundling its technology to the point where they're splitting off their Messenger app from the rest of their kind of newsfeed app. We're in a world where even sort of an app like Facebook is splitting down into smaller constituent parts. It's only going to get more complex. And you guys in this room and us on the other side of things need to get better at managing that complexity and not just looking to your supplier who walks through the door and goes, I can solve your problem for this many million quid, because it's a lie, it's not true. And that kind of leads me, I guess, to talking about partnerships and collaboration, which is my sort of final point, I suppose. I've talked about government as a platform, and Raquel did in her talk, and increasingly it's going to become complex with different suppliers, smaller suppliers that you're going to have to start to build relationships with. And I think getting better at managing that complexity, but also thinking about new models of partnership is going to become increasingly important. We've started to make some forays into this with some local authorities, so we've done some work with Staffordshire here in the room to develop Patchwork, the tool that I spoke to you about earlier, and they were really supportive of us in the beginning with that tool, where we were prototyping it and testing it and helping us to get that off the ground, recognising that over time that tool might become something that would yield a return on investment. So we've done the same thing with West Sussex County Council, and we also have a new business model with Surrey County Council, in which Surrey have invested in our company as a whole, and they own a 13% stake in the business. So Surrey are on our board of directors, we meet with them in board meetings, we go through all the figures with them, they're sort of intricately involved in the business. And I think starting to think of startups and how local government can support startups and actually make them partly their own will be a massively disruptive force. And I guess my closing point and my message, my plea to all of you who are here to the bitter end, who've made it right to the very end, is to be brave, because you are the heroes of local government. You're the people who are going to save this sector with a digital kind of thinking ahead mindset. You're the people who are going to insist that service users are involved in every stage of the design process of new tools. You're the people who are going to be responsible for tearing down the old world, for ripping up those huge mega contracts, and you're going to be the people who are responsible for managing that complexity and for creating those new business models. So be brave, and thanks for staying all the way to the end.
Gary, perfectly energetic for the last talk of the day. Thank you for that. So I'm assuming that because all of you have stayed, that means you've all got some questions that you still have yet to ask. We haven't got time to take a couple, so any volunteers from the audience who'd like to ask a question? Gentleman at the back there.
Thank you. Just to drag it back to potholes a minute, but
What?
I was just thinking about that, things like Fix My Street and What Do They Know, those kind of sites that already exist out there. Is there an argument for actually letting those guys get on with it and leading the field in it, or even encouraging them to do so?
I guess my question is, as opposed to what?
Essentially, what I'm suggesting, I suppose, is they're already doing it, they've seen the need, they're actually filling the gap that we haven't filled.
Yeah.
So why don't we just use them and let them get on with it,
yeah.
and we'll just piggyback onto them?
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting it as an argument.
Yes. So, I mean, would you like to argue against it? I can't think of an argument against it. You've won.
It does seem sensible. That seems an absolute great example of going where the conversation is, you know, go where the stuff is actually happening and make best use of what's already out there. No point in reinventing things, you've got plenty else to do. So, yeah, it seems like a good idea. What's in the way of that? I mean, what stops that happening? You know, why is it? Say again?
Absolutely. So John Jackson, CEO in Camden. I think just to take that point, I think this is where we crowd, because the power of crowd, because these applications developed out there, they look cool, they're excellent. What we need to do is use interfaces, APIs, to connect them into our legacy systems. I don't think it's just a question of throwing legacy systems out. I actually think realistically we can't afford to do that. I think we should open up our systems, drive through APIs, and share data so they become consumable as a service. So Fix My Streets, we can shim that within Camden's stack as a service. So, you know, in effect, we don't have to develop something called Fix Many Streets.
Yeah,
that's exactly what we need to do across the public sector. I think the one thing that strikes me that we should celebrate as well, let's not forget that the public sector, local government, doing some fantastic stuff right now. The procurement changes we're making, we heard about those this morning. One of the things we've done this year, for example, is got a new framework, and for the first time, the national framework for applications, we built into that the need for APIs, SDKs, and interoperability. So we're going to shake the market up to think differently about how it provides services to local government. I think the second thing is we do have an architectural blueprint in SOA to actually change the way we deliver services. But I think the third thing is the point that you made really well, all of you, is the absolute need for collaboration. How do we bring the great practices that happen out in LG makers, out in local government direct, together and actually make it really work across government to deliver something really different going forward?
Any observations?
I mean, I sort of agree with that stuff in principle, but I do think you're still talking about doing the same stuff. You're still talking about, you know, a better tool to fix potholes and to report potholes, rather than thinking about the nature of transport, like, which for me is like a much bigger question that doesn't get addressed through a lot of the digital conversation, because it's about the, and you know, absolutely we need better transactions and those tools do that, and APIs help with that, but forcing existing suppliers to open APIs, which, you know, of course we should be having and totally support that work, it still doesn't address some of my fundamental questions about the nature of service delivery. Really,
I agree with you absolutely, and I've tweeted on this. I'm writing something about Bitcoin government, because if you think about it, Bitcoin isn't just changing the way that we do banks and money. It's fundamentally actually introducing an entirely new way of actually doing money as a service, and just completely just changing the game. So I think your thinking is fantastic on that. I think it is about not just thinking about how we automate do what we do today differently, but actually how do we do government differently going forward. It's a big point, very big point.
Yeah, I mean, interesting, both of you. This is something was touched on yesterday about the dilemma that some of the people who need to make decisions in this area are people who might end up without a job as a result of making those decisions. And if you take John's argument and Carrie T, your argument to its absolute logical conclusion, you could almost say what you're saying is you don't need local government.
No, I don't know if that's what I'm saying. I think I'm saying we don't need local government in the form that it's in. There's always a role for democracy. That's because we live in a democracy, right? So I think actually that's really interesting. That's a really interesting part of local government, and something that sort of gets all the conversations I hear about democracy are just sort of like, oh, what's the role for members in this new digital world? Like, as opposed to let's think about really what it means to have a democratically elected local representation. Yeah, but I also think there's lots of some of those people who might be out of a job if they make those decisions are also ignoring massive potential personal growth opportunities to kind of take what they know how to do really well and sell that back into the sector, or sell that across to other sectors, other countries. And we have business in Australia now who are facing almost exactly the same challenges that we have here, but have a very kind of like, what's the worst that can happen, let's give it a try kind of attitude, which is quite refreshing. And you know, so a lot of this stuff is kind of globally applicable as well. So.
I think that's anything you particularly want to add on that?
I think that's right about the democracy issue, and what's really interesting is, you know, I think that it really does come down to, can we create proper local public services? It's not local government per se, it's like, what are those public services going to look like at a local level? And that's absolutely got to be democratic, and that's absolutely got to move powers out of Whitehall. And if you can kind of badge things up, so that you can actually free up some time somewhere else to do the actual thinking on that, I think that's really good, and that's maybe what isn't happening. People are kind of like held back by fear often about moving to that, but you know, you need a space where you can actually have a proper think about, exactly as you say, what's actually going to transform services.
I think there is a real good point about Turkey's not voting for Christmas. Turkey's not voting for Christmas scenario within the IT space, particularly in local government. And I think there is a role for Socitm to play, to actually talk to chief execs, saying what should you be expecting from your CIO to change that and to drive that. I think there's not enough of that.
I mean, it's always difficult. Disruption is always tricky. People have to change jobs. We've all had to change and learn new skills. Certainly, you know, I have. and it, you know, we see many industries and many sectors where this has had to happen. And no, it's not comfortable, and no, it's not easy, but people have to do it.
And ironically, weren't CIOs at one point the kind of disruptive force in local government, bringing in their newfangled technology and, you know, creating the email machine that everybody went to check their emails? And, you know, once upon a time, this room was full of rebels, and still should be. I feel like everyone who's here is slightly rebellious, just for staying.
Well, I think on those notes of positivity about local service and about local democracy is probably a very good point to bring things to a conclusion. Thanks to Jane, thanks to Carrie for your contributions. One last point of administration on behalf of the organisers, a reminder for those of you who have not yet filled out your feedback forms, please do so, and please give them back to the organisers. I'm sure Socitm would appreciate that to help make this an even better event for you next year, and try and get more people staying in the room for the last session as well. Thanks to all of you who have done that. I found it a really interesting day and a half sitting here listening to the conversations that have been going on. There's more exciting things going on in this sector at the moment than at any time I can remember. It would be great to come back here next year and instead of having someone like Tom, no criticism here, but someone like Tom Loosemore coming up and giving examples of all these great digital services he's seeing springing up in central government, wouldn't it be great to come back next year and have a day and a half of people from across the local authorities coming up and giving examples of the great services that they've developed in that time. And I think if there's probably one message that I would take away from the day and a half that's been consistent throughout this, it's just get out there and go and do it. There's no longer any reason not to. So good luck to all of you in doing that. Please continue to come to computerweekly.com and read about people doing it. I would be very appreciative if you can do that as well. But otherwise, on behalf of Socitm, thanks very much for everybody coming along. To Socitm, thanks very much for putting this on, and safe journey home, everybody. Thank you.